Next up, we get to a very important concept, and I know I can only say that a couple of times throughout JavaScript. I'll probably say everything's very important. Well, actually, there's some stuff I'm going to show you that's honestly not that important, but there's a lot of these really important building blocks, and this is one of them, the variable. Variables are a way of giving some name to a value and storing it using JavaScript so that we can come back to it later and reuse it or update it or just recall it. At the moment, we're working with data, just numbers for now, right? We can do things like add them together and get an answer, but then those numbers are gone. If I want to reuse them or I want this number, I have to type it again myself. And that seems like it's not that big of a deal if you're just calculating sums, and it's not. Well, I guess it could be annoying if we had really, really large sums with very large numbers, but typically our data in JavaScript is going to be a little bit more complicated than two numbers that we're adding together. And it will help a lot to be able to save it using JavaScript, to be able to come back to it later on in our script, 10 lines later or 100 lines of code later, and also have English names or whatever language you're using. But for me, it will be names in English where I can give a value a name so I can refer back to it. For example, I like to use this analogy of a jar with a value inside of it with a label on it, or a Tupperware. If you work in an office with a fridge and you ever bring your food in, you write your name on the Tupperware so other people don't take it. Yeah, it's kind of like that. I don't know, that might be a stretch. So all that we're doing is storing a value with a name so that I can come back to it. Now, how do we do this? Well, the basic syntax in JavaScript is right here. The keyword let, and then a variable name that you decide on, then an equals sign, and then some value that you want to store using that variable name. So here's a more concrete example. Let year equals 1985. What I'm doing here is saying, hello JavaScript, I'm going to be storing something under the name year, and the value I want you to put in that jar is 1985, the number. So then later on in my script, I can refer to year, and we'll see 1985 is what JavaScript has stored for us. So we can do that right here. Let year equal 1985. Now, this semicolon, technically, we're going to have a larger discussion about this. You don't need in the console, certainly. JavaScript will add a semicolon if you're missing one and it thinks you need one. So don't get too hung up on them right now. But technically, anytime you are declaring a variable, which is what this is, we should have a semicolon there. So that doesn't seem to do a whole lot for us. But we're basically just registering a variable. We're saying, hey, here's this thing I want you to know about. But we're not doing anything with it. The simplest thing we could do is just recall it. Now, every time I refer to year, I'm getting 1985. Now, of course, we can have multiple variables. They do need to have distinct names. We'll actually talk more about variable naming. But let's go ahead and create two. So I'm going to create the num of hens. I'm just going to call it num hens. It's a number of chickens, of hens specifically, that I have in my coop right now. So we have 5 hens. And then I'm going to come up with num roosters, which actually is just 1 right now. Okay, so I have 2 variables, num hens, num roosters, 5 and 1. Okay, so what happens when I do this? Num hens plus num roosters. We get 6, right? It's just a name and a name for 2 values behind the scenes. JavaScript goes and finds those values in memory, 5 and 1, and it adds them together. Now, have either num hens or num roosters changed? The answer is no. They are completely unchanged. They're exactly the same. All I did was retrieve the value. Please give me num hens and num roosters. Likewise, if I did something like num hens plus 1, let's say I added a new hen to my flock, this still does not change num hens. I'm retrieving the value and adding 1 to it, but that's it. I'm just getting that value and plussing 1. I'm adding 1 to it, but I'm not actually changing it in any way. It just vanishes. We get 6, and then that's it. That number is gone. We're not saving it anywhere. Now, something that we could do is this. Let total chickens equal num hens plus num roosters. So I'm adding the 2 together, and then I'm saving that result in a new variable, total chickens, which is 6, right? 5 plus 1. So if I did want to actually update one of these values, like I get a new chicken, a new hen, I need to add 1 to num hens, and not just add it into the ether like we did here, but actually update num hens. So this does not work. That gives me 6, but num hens is still 5. I can do this. Num hens equals And I could just manually update it to be 6, just like that. And now anywhere I reference num hens, we're looking at 6. Or I could do this, num hens equals the current number plus 1. So take the current value, whatever you are, it happened to be 6, add 1 to that, that gives us 7. Store that in the slot called num hens. It's the new value. Now, something I do see come up with students in the past, if you remember, we have this total chickens variable, and we set it equal to the number of hens plus num roosters. At the time, that total was 6. But now I've updated the number of hens, right? Num hens is now equal to 7. So what happens to this total chickens variable? Nothing. It is exactly the same as it was when we created it. It's a snapshot in time. This is not linked together. If we update num hens or num roosters, this value stored in total chickens will not change. I could change it myself and say total chickens is actually equal to num hens plus num roosters as they currently stand, and now we get 8. But just, I want to be very clear about that. They are not intrinsically linked. This is just a snapshot in time. What does this number come out to? Save that in total chickens. So this is our first intro to variables. Like I said, we'll be using them quite a bit. We have some other topics around variables and updating values, in naming them, a different keyword called const. So that's all coming up.